Verse 5 of Psalm 77 states, "I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times." Verse 6 continues, "I call to remembrance my song in the night." Under this section, we're going to see Asaph's recollection of former days. Luxor and Karnak Temples are located nearby or inside the city of Luxor, Egypt. Both of these temples boast magnificent art that is millennia old. On a trip to Egypt with a knowledgeable Egyptologist as our guide, my husband and I were able to understand with better clarity just what the art on the walls of these temples meant. Dozens of times, we stopped before battle scenes at various temples, at historic sites, not only there, but also in other places in Egypt, as our guide pointed out unique features like a pile of right hands that was counted as a number of individuals who were defeated in battle. Or maybe he pointed out other significant aspects, such as a list of place names that provided archaeological validation for the scriptural account. At Luxor, we stopped before a battle scene relief in which Ramses II demonstrated his defeat of the Hittites. Although the battle was more of a draw than an actual victory, Ramses II recorded it as a victory, and that is the version that lasts until this day. Syrians, Cushites, Semites, portrayed under the bases of pillars at that same temple, gave us a visual image of the biblical idea of conquered enemies being under the feet of a ruler. All a ruling pharaoh in Egypt need do to be reminded of the past or to be inspired by the kinds of defeats possible in his day would be to visit a temple of a previous pharaoh so that he, as that monarch ruling at that time, might be spurred on to greater acts of virtue in the present. History on the walls of temples like this frequently portrays the victories. It's not a record of defeats. For later generations, recorded history such as this could inspire patriotism, bolster courage, and assist in remembering former days so that that present generation might be encouraged. Such victories can happen again. And so here in our text, as Asaph lay searching for answers, frustrated by a tremendous lack of clarity, we see that he employs his time in many biblical ways. Earlier, we noticed that he sought the Lord in his confusion. He beat out that path, treading over and over his way to the throne of God. Here, in this verse, we see other ways in which Asaph responded biblically, though he felt no immediate relief. Verse 5 states, "I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times." So he has spent time considering the days of old. Now, this word consider means to think about, to account. One might think of an accountant drawing up a ledger, listing expenses, keeping careful track of what's been spent or what's been acquired in a business or corporation. It's this same sort of consideration that we learn Asaph did in his time of hardship. But what was he accounting? He was accounting the former days when God miraculously intervened on the behalf of his people, dividing the Red Sea, bringing his own out of Egypt, commanding deliverance after deliverance for Jacob. I wonder, does this sort of discipline, this kind of reckoning, characterize our thoughts when we're experiencing difficulty? Do we purposely decide, perhaps as we toss and turn on the bed at night, to count up the things God has done in former times that evidence his power, his love, his deliverance? In Deuteronomy 32:7, Moses commands the children of Israel, "Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee." Meditation upon the past, upon God's working in the past, is a thing that ought to prioritize our time. And yet, how many of us take time to ask older believers of the work of God in their lifetimes? Do we search out stories in which those who have walked with God for years tell of his mercy and strength to their souls? Here in this text, we learn that a regular discipline of our lives should be to remember what God has done and to ask older believers what God has done in their lives, so that as we learn of him and we see how he works, we therefore have molded for us a biblical perspective on our current situation. What does this discipline require? I believe it requires that we habitually learn facts about the past, that we search out and study what God has done in former days. We are such forgetful creatures. Frequently in his word, God commands, remember. For the children of Israel, remembering included calculating how God had specifically worked in their corner of the earth with his own. A contextual study of Deuteronomy 32 shows how God chose Israel, redeemed Israel, and put them in the land. Meditating on such deliverance becomes a precious use of time for God's children. So for us, as New Testament believers, it might be learning about the history of the specific church that we attend, or the history of Bible believers of the past who, although persecuted, remained firmly tenacious as they clung to God's word. We should fill our minds with truth about God's work as it touches his people in this world. If we spend our time musing only on current events, we can easily forget what God has done in the past. In reality, God puts down kings and sets up others. Current events will come and go, but God's plan for his people remains the same. As we saturate our minds with truth about God's work with his own on this planet, as we see what God has done in believers throughout history, some of whom were facing very similar situations to what we're dealing with now, our minds and hearts will be better prepared to understand, to some degree, what God is doing in our own lives. This discipline of remembering requires also that we ask questions of the right people. The command in Deuteronomy 32 continues with, ask thy father, and he will tell thee. Older believers who've experienced God's deliverance in many dark days will remember what the Lord has done for them as they respond to your question. You will be helped in having edifying conversations with believers as you ask specifics concerning God's working in their individual lives. And you will grow in your knowledge of God and his work as you marvel together in this God who commands deliverances for his own. Asking questions of the right people may include times of personal study in which you ask, how did God deliver believers in former generations? You may learn of others you never knew before as you investigate God's work with his own in years gone by. I've been privileged to do some study recently of Baptist history. Men who wrote literature in the 17 and 1800s and landed in prison for their work. They took a stand for what they believed and they ended up in jail, but they didn't let prison or their circumstances stop them from praising God. We know some of these men very well, like John Bunyan, who produced Pilgrim's Progress and other works during his years in prison. Also men like Abraham Cheer and Benjamin Keach, men who took the pen in hand and praised the Lord in their circumstances. So as you investigate the past as well, you can be greatly encouraged in your Christian life. Let's do what Asaph did. When he was in a difficult situation, he says, I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times.